Welcome back. Saturday, October 17th will mark the centennial of the birth of legendary playwright Arthur Miller. Coinciding with that event comes an unusual new staging of Miller's classic Death of a Salesman. This new production is being staged by a company called the New Yiddish Rep, and it's being presented almost entirely in Yiddish with English supertitles. The production uses a translation by a famous Yiddish actor named Joseph Buloff, who first debuted his Yiddish Salesman in Argentina back in 1951, and a production in Brooklyn soon followed. The New Yiddish Rep's Salesman began previews this past Thursday. Shortly before previews began, I caught up with the show's director, Moshe Yassur, and actor Avi Hoffman, who stars as Willy Loman. But before we bring you that interview, let's take a look at a moment from a rehearsal. Here's a look at company members rehearsing the scene where Biff breaks down in front of Willie, shattered over their failures in life, saying they are both a dime a dozen.
Ich bin Willy Loman. Was ihr wert $1 a show, Mr. Willy? In 7 Staaten bin ich euch gewesen. In die Show gekommen, also wir haben $1 a show. Und du kannst dich ansehen, als ich bin gar nicht und du bist gar nicht. Ich bin Willy Loman, gar nicht.
Avi Hoffman, Moshe Yassur, welcome to On Stage. Now, congratulations on your upcoming production of Death of a Salesman in Yiddish at the New Yiddish Rep. First of all, Moshe, can you explain why you chose Death of a Salesman for a new Yiddish Rep production?
We decided a long time ago that the Yiddish brings to the values of modern theater a certain sensibility which can only enhance the production. We have demonstrated that with Waiting for Godot, especially in Ireland. Yes, the member of audience came to us and said that we understood now the play much more than previously.
Now, looking at Death of a Salesman, I wonder how, and I'll get you in this as well, Avi, playing Willy Loman. How does doing or performing Death of a Salesman in Yiddish enhance this play?
Arthur Miller wrote this in 1949. This was after the Holocaust. This was after the creation of the State of Israel. And this was in light of the fact that his family were immigrants who came to America wanting to pursue the American dream. But they were Yiddish speakers. They came from a world where Yiddish was the way they expressed themselves. And in the writing, even in English, when you read the way the grammar is sometimes written, Willy Loman says to the woman, she says, "When will you be back?" He says, "Oh, 2 weeks about." Well, in English, you would say in about 2 weeks. But in Yiddish, you would say in 2 Wochen arum. So 2 weeks about. So we are now finding, looking at Death of a Salesman from the perspective in which we're presenting it, that it really is full with Jewish and Yiddish expression.
Yeah, I think your dramaturg had mentioned also,
yes,
Linda's speech, attention must be paid. It
That's
also
right.
has a Yiddish syntax.
Yes, Achtung
Right.
muss man geben. Attention must be paid.
Right. There was a Yiddish production of Death of a Salesman back in 1951. It opened just shortly after the original acclaimed Broadway production had closed. And it was at the Parkway Theater in Brooklyn, and there was a critic, George Ross, who wrote in Commentary magazine, he wrote, quote, "What one feels most strikingly is that this Yiddish play is really the original, and the Broadway production was merely Arthur Miller's translation into English." Clearly that wasn't the case, but what do you think about seeing this play in Yiddish would prompt someone to say that?
I've seen the play in Yiddish. I've seen Buloff in Israel, and it was a fantastic, fantastic rendering of an American play into the Yiddish gesture, into the Yiddish medium that was really full of very familiar to me because I grew up Yiddish speaking and Yiddish and bilingual I grew up. So the character of Willy Loman, I could not see another Willy Loman for many years. This was so imprinted in my memory.
Now, for non-Yiddish speaking audiences, I know you will have super titles, but how do you think this production will enhance their knowledge of the play?
Most people who will come to see this production are familiar with this quintessential American piece. I don't think there are any theater lovers out there who don't know Death of a Salesman, who may have seen several productions of it. But it's always been done a certain way. It's always been done in a very assimilated fashion. I think what we bring to this is, number one, they will understand it because they know the piece and there will be super titles. But what we bring to it is an entirely new soul that is Jewish in nature, that has that expressive language that is unlike any other. And as I perform Willy Loman, and you know, it humbles me to walk in the steps of such great actors, Brian Dennehy and Dustin Hoffman and Hoffman, Hoffman and Hoffman. Philip Seymour Hoffman. You know, that I'm not approaching it the way they've approached it. I'm approaching it from the sense of my Yiddish roots, and I think it brings the play back to its roots.
There's been a lot of speculation as to whether the Lomans were supposed to be Jewish. And Miller apparently based Willy Loman on his uncle, Manny Newman.
Yeah.
And at one point in the 60s, Miller had said that Loman's religious or cultural background was irrelevant. But in 1999, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the play, he wrote that the Lomans were, quote, Jews light years away from religion or a community that might have fostered Jewish identity. So do you see this aspect of the Lomans' identity making their situation even more tragic?
The tragedy is consistent with the fact that today we are discussing in the world the issue of immigrants. We're discussing the issue of refugees. And so if this play from our perspective is about refugees from Europe who came, the Jews who went to peddle on the Lower East Side and succeeded and then became traveling salesmen and pursued the American dream. Some succeeded, many failed. I think this play continues to talk to today's world, where we have immigrants from all over coming to pursue that American dream. And some may succeed, but so many others fail.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank you both so much for coming in. As we tape this today, you're still in rehearsal, but you will be beginning previews at the Castillo Theater on West 42nd Street on October 8th.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned, the new Yiddish production of Death of a Salesman is currently in previews at the Castillo Theater. The official opening is set for October 15th. Okay, it's time for a short break. Up next, Roma Torrey brings us her review of the Manhattan Theater Club's staging of Fool for Love, and David Cody weighs in on the Roundabouts production of Old Times.